Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Raul Avila, along with my co-host, Pastor Nate Conant. How's everything today, Pastor Nate?
It's a good day.
You having a great day?
It's a great day.
It's always a great day with you.
I think
Attitude
so.
is everything, huh?
I think it's important. I mean, sometimes, like I've said before, like if you have 1 or 2 bad days a year, it's okay. But if you're having 300 plus bad days a year, you need to check something.
Yeah.
Probably your heart and your mind.
Yeah.
Definitely, guys. So this is Father's Voice, the podcast dedicated to empowering men to embody essential qualities and values in the role of father, husband, provider, and man of God. In each of these episodes, we will chase greatness, drawing inspiration from timeless wisdom of the Bible and personal experiences from many of our guests. And today we have a very special guest. We have our very own Pastor Andrew Sanchez.
Come on.
What's going on?
Yeah, it's going to be a good one, Pastor.
So as an introductory remarks to you, so we'll talk a little bit about you, and you can elaborate as we go into it.
Sure.
How old are you right now?
39.
Come on. Looking at 40 years old.
Yes. Right around the corner. October.
There you go. Married how many years?
Married 9 years.
9 years?
Yep.
And currently living in a blended family, correct?
Yeah, blended family. Yep,
Mhm.
that is correct. Yep. 3 kids, 3 boys. Yep.
Come on.
So you got a boy family.
Man.
Pray for my wife.
Amazing, sweet wife.
Yeah.
Pastor Ashley
She's
is
awesome.
fantastic.
Super gracious.
Yeah.
Definitely brings a healthy balance to the home.
Mhm.
Let's just say that.
As far as in the pastoral, how many years?
Pastor role, I would say, I think it's, 2014 was when I was ordained.
Nice. So about 10 years now.
Yeah. 10 years. Yeah. Coming
Wow.
up.
Still going
Yeah.
and don't hate everybody yet.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I remember when he got ordained.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
can't believe it's been 10 years
Yeah,
already.
2014. I only know
Wow.
that because I have this little, Ashley bought me a wallet, a clip wallet,
Yeah.
and there's a little plaque, on the other side of the clip, and you could put a quote on there or something like that. So it says, Pastor Andrew, 2014, whatever.
So I will say one thing. I'm not going to necessarily call you younger, but you're younger than me and Raul, so we'll say younger for now. I've always, I admire and want to be an encourager and a fan to any young man who wants to be in ministry. Ministry is certainly not easy. Probably people outside of ministry don't necessarily understand. You'll see a person on the stage, you'll see the person when the lights are on or the picture's good. But generally, the opposition you have, not only at times from people, but spiritually that you have in ministry is probably something few people experience. And so I celebrate you at 10 years of ministry. I've seen lots of, it's not always easy to be in ministry, right? Because there's all kinds of headwind and opposition.
Right.
And I'm not here to be negative about it. I just always want to acknowledge it for what it is.
Yeah.
So in looking at it for the reality, it's not easy to have been in ministry for 10 years because there's many who will step away.
Yeah.
And for multiple reasons. I mean, some good reasons, some whatever. It's not easy. And so I celebrate 10 years of ministry is fantastic.
No, thank you.
And I would encourage any young person, like if God puts a call in your life to be in ministry, you should pursue it. It'll be the only thing that will ever satisfy you. Generally, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of negative stereotypes about those that are in ministry. I don't know, like it's for the money, or they'll give you a lot of negative things. The reality, as you well know, you didn't do this for money.
No.
Right? Because you could have done other things that would make you much, much more money.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you did it because God called you into it, and you've persevered in it in spite of all the reasons why you can't. I think they even said there was a statistic thing about 2 years ago. It was like 70% of guys in ministry were contemplating quitting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's a big percentage.
It is
percentage.
huge. Yeah.
And they had
really huge.
lots of guys stepping away from ministry. Even now, I've even had personal friends of mine that have.
Yeah.
Because it's just not that easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, leading a volunteer army is
hard.
It's got to be one of the toughest things to do.
Very challenging. I mean, one thing that people forget, when it comes to not just church, but I think any nonprofit, where there's volunteers, it's volunteer based. Volunteers are a big part of what moves that organization forward. One thing that nonprofits don't have is this incentive called a salary, or an hourly rate. And so therefore your leadership has to be on a whole nother level. Your heart has to be on a whole nother level. And that's the challenge that we deal with. There's ministry doesn't necessarily pay, but it's rewarding.
Very much.
And that's what's constantly kept me on this path, so to speak. And I always tell people it's passion. Passion is what pulled me into it, not provision. So it wasn't a number, it wasn't a dollar amount. It was just that passion, that God instilled inside of me, that I could make a difference, in the lives of people. Whether at the time I think it was young people, so youth, and that's what pulled me in.
Yeah, and what keeps you? You would say what keeps you in right now, and we will rewind right now and
For sure.
and go back in your youth. But at this point in your life, what keeps you in ministry? What are some of the things that you would say, you know what, 10 years, I'm more passionate, or what are some of the things that you would say, man, this is what keeps me still in ministry? What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to one of the things that gives birth to passion, and that is a burden. You know, and what keeps me in ministry is my burden for lost people. You know, seeing people lost, meaning, you know, depending on, you know, who's tuning in, you know, to not be too Christianese about it, but somebody who's lost is pretty much somebody who's missing the target, you know, who does not, in other words, they don't know their purpose. They don't know their value. They don't know their identity, you know, and they're out there trying to fulfill themselves with things that aren't really filling something that only God himself can fulfill. And so, you know, back to your question, to circle back, you know, that burden for people that are just lost, you know, keeps me in the game.
That's powerful.
That's good.
Thank you.
So you've been a campus pastor, a couple locations, been youth pastor, now I think executive pastor, so all different kinds of roles along the way. The hats always change. The way I always say it is titles may change, the calls for the lifetime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely a calling for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've been called. How do you know you've been called? Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting with two pastors here now. I'm curious.
Well,
Sorry,
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I would certainly say that you know spiritually when you're called. So like for me, I knew when I was called, like there was a moment in Palm Springs before I ever lived out here where I knew I was called to ministry. And like there was this moment where I was like, wow, this is different. And like God literally saying, I'm calling you into ministry. So I think those that are in ministry have to have like that whatever where they knew they were called into ministry. And then it's sort of like you go through this whole progression of what it is to get wherever God's taking you along the way. So I think every person that is in ministry had to have been called by God. Don't ever go there if God didn't call you there. Is what I would advise any person. So don't do it, because I remember, I don't know, I've talked to young people like, I want to be a pastor. Why? Well, I don't like to work. I don't like to do anything. I thought, oh my goodness, those guys never make it. They never last, right? So because that's what it's about. I think the call of God upon your life has to be something you know, whether it was in a moment or just you knew over a while. So I think you have to have the call in your life.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Everything that you said, you know, that's what again that's led to me to say yes was, I just call it that tug on your heart. You know, it's an undeniable pull. You know, and honestly, you know, everybody that's at the table right now, we're all walking in our calling. You know, obviously in different avenues, you know, different expressions, but we're all walking in our calling. And I say that to say, if anybody that's tuning in, you know, if you're not in what we say ministry, you know, meaning you're not paid by the church or working for the church, you could still be walking in your calling. I just wanted to make that clear, because some people think a calling means, you know, I got to work for the church one day.
Yeah, sure.
You know, but that's you're limiting your calling. A calling is not bound to working or being on staff at a church.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's why I say everybody at the table is, you know, walking in their calling. You're walking in your calling and what you do and what God has called you to do.
The one way I would look at like ministry, and this is always the way I do. So obviously, I'm a pastor, but I don't get compensated for being a pastor.
Right.
Nor did Paul. Right. So Paul would actually even slow brag about it. And I do at times too, where Paul would be like, I laid no burden on you. Like I expect you to give, but I didn't put the burden on you.
Yeah.
That's good.
So for me, I like to be like Paul. So Paul was a tent maker and a great apostle.
Right.
But then you had the other 12 disciples or 11 disciples, Peter, etc., who were more full-time.
Yeah.
Compensated for that. So you can have both.
Yeah.
But I think you have to walk in your calling. So I would say to any person out there, like,
that's good.
Pastor Andrew is right in saying, like, don't think the goal is to be on staff at a church.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Right.
God can use you in all different kinds of ways without it. I mean, Paul was used exponentially greater than most. Like he started the Gentile church. Without it, we don't have 2/3 of the New Testament. This is Paul. And all the while he was bivocational. Like literally he wasn't necessarily receiving income from the church. And that's the way he chose to do it. So I think there's both in it, and people get trapped into saying, I got to be on staff. Well, do you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes back to burden too. You know, like I mentioned earlier, when somebody says, well, how do I know what I'm called to do? Well, it starts with burden. And somebody, you know, thinking, well, what do we mean by burden? Like, what bothers you? Like, for example, some people are called, they have a specific homeless ministry. Yeah. And what led to giving birth to that homeless ministry was it started out with a burden. There was a burden of seeing homelessness, and they say, I need to do something about this. There was that voice, and that's what, you know, we would say and address as the Holy Spirit or God calling you. Yeah. There was that voice that said, I need to bring a solution to this. And in that moment, that person was being pulled into their calling. That was the phone call.
A burden.
It's the burden. It's like, I can't keep looking at this. I can't keep looking at this homelessness. I need to do something. I need to bring a solution to this. That's why I said, like, for me, it's lost people who don't know their identity or are not walking in purpose or not walking fulfilled. Like, that's a burden for me. I need you to walk fulfilled. I need you to know your identity in God. I need you to be stepping into your purpose and walking in your purpose and making a difference. So again, it goes back when it comes to call, it goes back to burden.
Yeah. Somebody said it, I think it was Pastor Obed, that he said, what is it that you hate?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is it that you hate? And so if you hate it, then it's probably something that you're called to change,
right?
To fix. You hate it, so you want to fix it. So maybe that's a burden. That's the type of calling that you have in your life.
That's good.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. No, I mean, that to me, that's also, I guess, hate, I'll use your word, hate is almost a form of burden.
Like a synonym.
Like, I hate seeing homelessness. So I feel this call to bring a solution so there's less homelessness and we provide housing or we feed them or whatever, all that the Bible, encourages us to do.
Nice.
Very cool.
Is there anything else as far as your bio you want to say to us? Maybe something we don't know?
No. Well, I mean, I always like to share just a fun fact about myself that, because I was introduced obviously as Pastor Andrew. Wasn't a pastor all my life. I always like to share that. And again, I was called into ministry one day, but in regard to my past, I have a BC life is how I like to describe it. That means before Christ.
For sure.
Before I decided to follow Jesus, I was following a lot of other things, to say the least,
A phenomenal dancer.
And then, fun fact is, I was a hip hop dancer, did some choreography, I was part of a breakdancing crew, to this day, I respect hip hop dancing,
So like, let's go there for a minute. So like in the Olympics, they just had breakdancing, and I think that Australian girl was just horrible. Like when I see the break, I just don't know what's going on with that.
Was she messing around or was she an amateur?
No, she was a veteran.
What?
The girl that she was rolling around on the ground. Yeah, I could have done it.
Because I saw most of them were pretty good.
Some of them were legit.
Yeah.
From my research. Okay.
From your area, this is your area of expertise, right?
We got an expert.
And people, hey, if I'm wrong on any point, leave comments on the podcast post or whatever. But she was a professor of hip hop dancing, breakdancing specifically. And one thing that I've learned is just because you know something doesn't mean you do well at it.
That's good.
For example, there's a lot of phenomenal theologians out there or people that have doctorates in theology. And when it comes to them unpacking the Bible, doing exegete and all that stuff, they're really good at that. But they don't always make the best preachers, so to speak. So back to the breakdancing, she obviously has a lot of head knowledge. She's very aware. I don't want to sit here and say that all of her dancing was horrible. But it probably, it is at a different level than what you would see in regard to what was really good breakdancing.
For sure.
To say the least.
So would you say keep breakdancing in the Olympics then? So you're saying...
Yes,
I think they took it off already.
I've heard they took it off.
They did take it off already. And I think that was I would disagree with that decision to take it off.
Okay.
Because it's almost like, you're gonna remove something based off one person's performance.
Yeah.
I don't think that's justification to remove something. It's almost like saying, remove the church because there's one bad Christian. It's like, that's rough.
And that's on its first year too.
Yeah.
But she was really bad.
It was very tough to watch.
It was hard to watch. It was laughable. I mean, I could have rolled around or roll. I mean, we could have rolled down and done the same thing. And I mean, it was just, I don't know. I think it was more funny than good. So
if my wife was encouraged to learn her routine, and my wife never breakdanced in her life, kind of tells you a little bit something about, So
you were a dancer back in the day.
Yeah, dancer back in the day.
It still got moves.
I think so.
You think you'll try for the Olympics, or are you gonna?
Absolutely not. No, I won't. Okay. I won't.
Okay.
It's a hobby.
Yeah.
Or probably barely even a hobby. I don't do it as often, but I do respect it. I still get excited about it. I still get, when you have a passion for something, when you're critical about it, So sometimes when I see different choreography, whether on TikTok or any of social media platform, I'll still get critical about it, or I'll get excited about it. It's like, man, that was a really good routine, and just honor and respect. I'll even comment on some of the guys that I see popping and stuff like that. Because I still have a respect for it.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what we do first is we're going to go back into your childhood for a few moments to sort of look back at your childhood and have you tell some stories out of your childhood specifically. So if we go back to your childhood, I know some of it, but it's, I think, important that you sort of share your experience specifically in terms of your father relationship or what it was like as a child. So when we look at your childhood, we start sort of like 10 or below.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you remember about your childhood?
Yeah, and specifically with your father relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
I know
Yeah,
there's some
of course.
things you can add to that. So I know
Absolutely.
we're going to go. But talk to us about a memory or relationship or lack of, say,
Yeah.
for example, with your father as a child.
Yeah. So both my parents were very young,
Mm-hmm.
when they had me, 16.
Hmm.
So here's somebody, meaning my dad, who's about to embrace a son, become a father. Probably a lot of discovery for him. I'm speaking for him as my dad, probably a lot of discovery happening. I wouldn't say he had the greatest examples either, meaning my grandfather and my great-grandfather. He did his best. Him and my mom were not together at all. They tried, from what I've heard, and this is when I was too young, from what I heard, they tried to work things out, did not last. So by the time I got to an age to where I can start, remembering things.
3-4 years old, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, 3-4 years old. They were separate. I did like being with my dad. I remember that. I remember love being with my dad.
At what age do you remember that?
Around from between 5 and about 9.
Nice.
And I say I'll get into what happened at 9 and why I gave it that time frame. So yeah, from about 5 to about 9, when I did go with my dad, because it was like visits, or I would stay the weekend with him again, because him and my mom weren't together. They're very young, and they were also still learning so much at that age. They were still involved in some things, when it comes to partying and what comes with the partying scene. So they also have that going on. But I do remember love being with my dad. When I was with him, I remember like him making breakfast in the morning for me. Like, these are little things that just come to mind even right now. Making breakfast for me. I remember we lived in a very bad neighborhood, but he was somebody who was respected in the neighborhood because what he was involved in, to say the least, without getting too much into it. But we used to walk down to this market, and I remember like he would always buy, a thing of OJ and these little cinnamon rolls from this little mini market, on the corner, and moments like that, spending time with my dad that I really enjoyed, but again, I wasn't with him full time. He wasn't in the house.
So you'd see him every other weekend kind of deal.
Just about, yeah, every other weekend. Loved my mom too, of course, everything she did, but that was like my time with my dad. And I started here's another thing I remember about my father, within that time frame, 5 to 9, I did have this desire to like be like him. There was something about my dad, and it's nothing that he ever I don't remember him drilling it in me at that age. You need to be like me. Like, I don't think I've ever remember my dad saying that.
Now, what is it that you wanted to be like?
Well,
what about him did you?
Was he the toughest guy on the block? Or?
Yeah, my dad was very bold. I saw that a lot of guys, anybody that came over his house, at my grandfather's house, had a lot of respect for him. And again, probably due to what he was involved in.
Was it gang affiliation?
Yes, it was gang affiliation, yeah. And then at the time, again, keep in mind, I'm very immature, very young at this age, there was girls, was also part of that scene, and, pretty girls, and more than one, would visit. One week he's introducing me to Julie, the next week it's Sandy, and anyway, so those were some of the things that stood out to me, that I think made me want to kind of be like him. Mostly though, I think the most thing was just the kind of that respect and his boldness. Like he walked with this, just a boldness.
Confidence.
This confidence about him, that I was kind of drawn to. That I was like, man, I want that, because at that time, again, young, probably had a lot of insecurities that dealing with at that age. So those are some things that kind of like made me want to be like him.
Was it a local, like Coachella Valley gang? Or was it out of the Coachella Valley?
Yeah, it was local. Yeah, in the Coachella Valley.
Cool.
Yeah, that stuff that he was a part of. Yeah.
Got it. And then so you have relatively positive memories of your father in terms of like admiring him, spending time with him, etc. And then what happens around 9-10 years old?
Yeah, well, what happened is he made a decision. He committed a crime. I could share this because it actually is a testimony for anybody listening in, meaning my dad's life has totally transformed, and God is a big part of my dad's transformation. So I don't want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. But, like him, we all have a past. And he made the decision to shoot and kill somebody. Yeah. And from what I understood, it was just over, drugs and stuff like that.
Probably gang related.
Yeah, I think it was mostly drugs, drug related, and he made that decision that led to a sentence of 15 to life, and I remember as another, almost like PTSD, I remember like I kept calling my dad, to get a hold of him, because again, remember I would go over there like almost every other weekend, and if I could spend more time with my dad, I would want to. Again, I really liked being with my dad when I was with him, and I remember not being able to get a hold of him, and I was like, why isn't he answering, and what's going on? And then I get that collect call, this is so-and-so calling from this penitentiary, and and I was like, and so that's when he told me, hey son, do you know where I'm at? And I was like, well, I heard, sorry, really quick. And somebody had told me they saw my dad in the newspaper, about something, and it was bad. And I had found out, what he had did. And so now, my father, who was kind of there in my life, who I was kind of starting to look up to, makes that decision, 15 to life in prison. And so that leaves me, obviously in a tough situation.
Now, do you have any brothers and sisters? Any siblings?
Yes, but they're up north. He had them later. So with the same father, yes, another brother and sister who are up north who he had later. And then
But through your mom, you're the only one?
Through my mom, no. And I also have a brother from I would consider him my stepdad. Him and my mom were never married, but he was the man that was in my mom's life for the longest time. They had my brother. Yeah. So,
after you.
Yes.
What's the age gap between you?
I'm the oldest.
What's the age gap between you and your brother?
Which one? The one up north?
The one down here.
The one down here?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 7 years.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So when your dad goes off to be incarcerated, did you have the opportunity to go see him, or was it mainly phone calls that you were able to communicate with him?
I did have an opportunity to go see him, but he was somewhere. I forgot what institution he was at, but I do remember it was a reasonable distance. I remember going with my grandfather. I think it was somewhere like around 2 hours away or something like that, maybe 3 hours away. So I did, but definitely not often.
Yeah.
It was probably
once every other year or something like that.
If that, yeah. At that young of an age, it was if that, maybe.
So it seems like, it sounds like your dad but at that point, a hero of yours, and then he gets in a way taken away from you. Mm-hmm. How does that affect you as a young 9-year-old, 10-year-old? It's hard to even grasp that concept at that age, right? What do you remember about that?
Well, it made it very difficult for me because now he was a big support for me. He was somebody I could lean on. Again, I know he wasn't there all the time, but he was still somebody, if I wanted to call for advice, I can call him, or if I just wanted to call to say I love you, or what are you doing? So even though I wasn't seeing him in person, it was great to know that I could pick up the phone and just talk with him, whatever it may be. And so now that's lost. I can't just pick up the phone and talk to him. I can't go over and just give him a hug. So what I lost like, a big connection to somebody that I looked up to. So it's almost like having you said hero. So yeah, if I looked up to him that way at that time, it's almost like having your hero removed, right. And so now it's like, well, what do? I don't have this person to lean on anymore. And I think what that did is it started to cultivate an unhealthy dependency on me. Because now I have no father figure to depend on. Don't get me wrong. I still kind of, in some sense, depended on my mom, but she could, as a mother raising a young boy to become a man, in her nature, she only has so much that she could offer, the way God designed us, right?
For sure.
Can you speak on that?
Yeah.
Because we do talk a lot about that. What is your opinion, your perspective of that the fact that a mother can't really instill masculinity into a boy? Talk a little. Can you describe your concept of that?
And obviously there's something of a void, but obviously we look at your friends, and now you've raised a son, 18, 19 years old, so you can sort of like see both.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think again it goes back to our original design. Okay, the way God designed us. It's not necessarily my opinion. It's literally in our blood, biologically how we were designed, the way we think. How we were created. We were created for certain things. As a father, there's a reason that I'm able to lead. There's a reason why I have a hunger and ambitions. Not that I'm not to say that women do not, but it's just different what we're biologically designed to do as a man who becomes a father and fathering a child versus mothering a child, nurturing a child, and things that a father is designed to show, another young man to become a man. So I don't know if that answers your questions. I think I just lean on the way we were created, and designed when it comes to being a father versus being a mother. And I also want to make sure to say that both are necessary. For sure. To me, that's like the best team. If creation, if God would wanted to just make males, I don't think he ever would have created an Eve. You know what I mean? If there was no value, I guess what I'm trying to say, if there was no value for women, then God would have never because he's God Almighty. He would have known, right?
Right.
But obviously there was a value in having the woman at the side of a man. The Bible calls them, it's our helpmate, so both are very valuable, but everybody has their roles, so to speak.
Equal value, different roles.
Yeah. Yeah. Equal value, different roles, different functions, because of the way they're designed.
Especially with young people, I think young men especially, they're always looking for modeled behavior, not just what you say, but what they modeled. And even what you hear about Andrew is really like he saw what his dad was. He's like, he's this leader guy. He's this, the girls like him. He's like, there's all this behavior he's seeing that he's saying, I want to model that. Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. In the moment of losing your father in that sense, and I ask this because I've known other kids that have struggled with this in the same kind of sort of way. In terms of the depression, i.e. maybe even suicide, any of those thoughts ever hit you? How do as you coped with in that moment at 9, 10, 11 years old, what was that like in terms of your mental health and specifically like depression, even at times suicide, even to the extreme?
Yeah, no, I had a lot of internal pain. I was hurt, but I didn't know how to express it. And here's one thing that I think is good for people to know is everybody has a different pain tolerance. Your pain tolerance, my pain tolerance, your pain, all three of us, and I bet you our pain tolerance would be different. Because we're awesome leaders, it's probably really high, but but different. And I say that to say that the way another young teenager processed the hurt that I experienced, they probably would have went into depression. Yeah. They probably wouldn't have been, they would have handled the pain differently, if that makes sense.
For sure.
Because everybody has a different pain tolerance. I think God, probably because he knew what I was going to go through, I think he developed a high pain tolerance within myself. So all that to say, I don't remember any thoughts of like depression. I don't really remember thoughts of suicide, but I was hurt though. There was an internal hurt. Like I remember crying for my father. There was moments where, again, God bless my mom, but I wanted my dad to hug me.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear my dad's voice. I wanted his affirmation. I wanted that. I mean, my mom used to tell me like, come on, keep going, son. And I love her encouragement, but I wanted to hear that from my father. I wanted him to say, son, no, you can't quit. I've been through some things and I've made it through. You can, and I didn't have that,
So, okay. So you didn't go into that. So would you say, because yes, sometimes there are some things that we have gifts that we were just almost like born with them,
Yeah.
But the mental toughness part, I have a philosophy that is something that you could build.
Yes.
The more tough times you go through, the more callous you build, and the more thicker skin you are. So
correct.
So would you say that, because that's a tough, I would say, a tough blow, losing your dad at such a young age. But would you say that your dad, in a way, prepared you for that moment? Would he always coach you and say, no, you got to be like things that are masculine, right? Not over the top, like men don't cry, but things like, hey, son, look, sometimes when you go through tough times, like he was preparing you, brainwashing you in a way.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of that?
What I do remember is, and this is what a lot of people would tell me about my father, he never really had to tell me, I would hear it more from other people, is your dad is smart and your dad is a fighter. Physically as well. People used to tell me, man, I remember your dad beating up this guy, or getting in a fight with these people, or some guys tried to jump him and, he made it out or whatever, and I was like, man, that's kind of awesome. There was that toughness, I guess. So maybe I'm guessing here, maybe that hearing about my father's reputation of him being a fighter, that could have started to cultivate that mindset, because your mindset is a result of what you hear the most. Right. And so hearing that probably could have developed a little bit of that, begin to develop that fighter within me, and so maybe I fought through that pain. And it's funny because I haven't talked about this for a while. So even me talking it through right now, that's why I say I'm guessing, because I think that there's some truth to that, because of what I heard about him. Almost, and again, wanting to be like my dad, I was like, well, I want to be a fighter too. And so maybe that's how I approach my pain. At that time, I couldn't describe it and I didn't know, but maybe that's the way I approach my pain, was like, hey, maybe I just got to fight through this. I'm still hurt. This is still uncomfortable. I still don't want to be in this situation. I still want my dad. All these natural desires that I know young men have. But I think that fighter within me, or that mindset, said, no, you got to push through.
Yeah. Well said. So in that season of your dad being away and you only making phone calls, was there any other, and I think you mentioned your stepdad, was there any other men that stepped into sort of that role? Are you allowed to have that space in your life of being like a father's voice or a father figure in that time?
Did anybody else step into his role?
For sure. Yes.
Yeah. So that's the one that was with my mom the longest.
Okay.
I considered him my stepfather. He's the one who like was involved in like the sports. You know, when I
Nice.
did baseball.
What was his name?
His name was Frankie.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So he took on a big, and I look back now and it's like, wow, no, you took on a big role.
For
you
sure.
know,
Did you struggle with that, or were you able to have like a decent relationship with him?
In the beginning, I did.
For sure.
In the beginning, I did. And I do. That's another thing that I do remember. Also because my real dad, you know, it was gangster rap, hip hop, oldies, super just masculine things, being tough, all that stuff, you know. But my stepdad was heavy metal music, rock and roll. He was a drummer for like this awesome rock and roll band, you know, Metallica and just all that stuff, you know, long hair. I mean, super straight hair. Like, so I was like,
was he a white dude?
No, he's Mexican Indian.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. He actually, with his long hair, he looks more Indian because he's naturally dark skin and super straight hair.
That's funny.
So anyway, it was a change of scenery, a change of music genre. I used to think this rock music sucks. Like all these guys do is yell, and you know it's just so obnoxious, and you know. And I remember hating that. And of course, since he was connected, that I was like, "You're not my dad," kind of thing, you know. But the more time he spent with me and the love that he showed me, it changed my perspective about him.
So was your adjustment to allowing him to be like a father's voice in your life 2-3 years? Was it more? I mean, as you're stepping into being a teenager, I'm sure it's hard on him and you. How long did it take for you to adjust or to get used to?
It didn't take long, and I think it's because of my hunger for a father. I think just that male figure.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if he's the one, and he showed some consistency in the beginning, I was like, well, maybe I can learn to listen to him.
Yeah.
You know, if my mom likes him, well, you know, I trust my mom already. Maybe I'll trust who she likes.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think it didn't take too long. I can't give you a time frame, but I do remember it was fairly quick. But I think a lot of that is connected to I wanted a father figure.
That's good. And you know, honestly, it's in its own way, it's a bit of a blessing. I don't know how you look at it now, but like to those men that step into those situations where you're stepping in as a stepdad, it's not an easy place to be. It's really difficult.
No.
Growing up as a kid, we had a blended family too, where my oldest brother wasn't, and I know there's just a lot of challenges because that young man's going to be sort of pushing against the other guy that's not his real dad, so-called.
That's tough.
So shout out to all the guys like the Frankies in this world who do step up and they sacrifice their time, their money, and they give up themselves to be that role for young men that need that in their lives.
And I think one thing that's healthy to point out too is how young I was. So I was still being shaped. You know, I think a
lot of innocence still.
A lot of innocence, a lot of vulnerability still, like growing up. I say that to say because if you were to take my situation, but now consider somebody who's a young man who's 15, it probably would have took him longer because he probably starting to get more set in his ways. He's not open to whatever this man is trying to tell him what to do or not to do. He probably bucks authority a little bit more at that age because that's what teenagers do.
They do.
You know, so it might have been different if I was maybe growing up a little bit more. I think because of where I was in my life, young, vulnerable, still had a lot of growing up to do. I really just wanted a dad still at that time, the innocence. I think it made that transition and me embracing him as a father figure maybe that much easier.
Nice.
And so I see a trend a lot because we've been doing a lot of interviews and you mentioning I wanted that father. Yeah, my mom fulfilled. What roles did your mom fulfill for our speakers and so that, you know, as people hear this podcast, they could see, hey, this is a pattern. There is a difference here, you know. What things did your mom fulfill in your life as a young man? And why were you looking for that father figure that you knew that, you know, your mom could only do so much? What were you looking from a man that you couldn't get from your mom? Because your mom was always there. I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
She's always in the picture. So
yeah, in the picture, but keep in mind, you know, she worked a lot. So in the picture, but not. And she had to work a lot because she had to make ends meet. So what I really, and going back to like your question though, I was looking for a leader, you know, somebody to really lead me, you know, and lead me to be tough. My mom would lead me in how to be gracious. I think that's what my mom provided. She was very gracious with some things. Oh, mijo, oh, you're okay. I love you. You know, get back up, dust yourself off. You know, and her approach, obviously, very gracious and stuff. You'll be okay and stuff. And not that that's
That's
bad.
effeminate.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just women, right?
It goes back to their design,
nature.
their nature, the way
Their
God
nature.
designed them, right? But I also wanted just somebody to be like, to lead me. Like, I also wanted somebody, one thing, I love my mom, you know, but I think when it comes to a father, one thing that a father does provide is a father can provide vision for the future.
Yeah.
You know, and we all need that. You know, what does the Bible say? You know, without vision, the people, they perish. You know, and that's actually why I perished for a season, I would say. And then obviously Jesus redeemed me. But I had this season of perishing, you know, walking off course because I never had like that vision. And that's one thing that I was like seeking that, you know, my dad used to, my dad was always, we're going to do this. We're going to go here. I remember that was another thing he would do. And I'm like, all right, let's go. You know, he was always my dad always seemed like he was always on a mission, which he probably was a very bad mission at that time, to say the least. But he was always on this like mission, you know, we're going to go here, we're going to do that and and that's what I wanted to continue.
Yeah.
You know, when my dad wasn't there, who's pulling me forward? My mom was more like, you're good in the moment, but I needed something like pull me forward. Like, no, you're better than that.
Let's go on an adventure.
Yes. Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah. Like, talking about the adventure, you know, making me excited about this adventure so that I don't quit when it gets tough, you know, and just having that, you know, so anyway, that's one thing that I really wanted from my father. My mom, again, because I think your question also, what did like my mom provide? It was just that grace that, you know, you're okay. Everything's going to be fine. The nurture, very soft. Come here, you know, I got you. Don't worry about it, you know, which was still definitely needed at times.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, certainly like the Bible always deals with the ideal, right? So the ideal is one man, one woman, kids. That's the nuclear family. And so the Bible, from our perspective, generally, like that's how God planned it to be. And so I think every young person is going to need different things from their parents, but the ideal that we see in Scripture is still always that there's a mother and a father very active in a young person's life.
And one thing that might be good to point out too is that, you know, going back to my mom, she worked a lot. So I'm even thinking like, how much time did she invest actually being a mom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really.
Like I'm really thinking about that right now, and not a lot.
Yeah.
Because by the time she got home, it was just, she's going to try to bust out a meal real quick. And sometimes, you know, she would work kind of late, so she didn't have time to really cook. She knew how to cook, but she didn't always have time to cook. Sometimes it was Stouffer's frozen meals, you know, and she had enough time to do that. We would eat. You guys good? You good for school? You know, and there was also a season where my mom, her education only went so far. So she couldn't even help me with a lot of my homework. There was a lot of self-dependency without having my dad. And I think that's the challenge with young men growing up without father figures or a physical father, is it creates this unhealthy self-dependency where you feel like you need to figure everything out, you know, on your own because you never have like that guidance.
What do you think that builds? Like distrust issues? Like if you're like, I guess I'm on my own here.
Yeah. Well,
So you start not trusting people because you're like, hey, if it's going to be, it's up to me. And I guess that's what life, that's that's what I was dealt with.
Yeah.
You know? What do you think about that?
I agree with your statement about like it's hard to trust. And I think broken trust, you know, develops through disappointment. You know, it's because my dad, that was a disappointment in my life, you know, him going to jail. I was disappointed, you know, so that led to broken trust. And so, yes, it was hard to trust, even though, again, I still gave Frankie, you know, my stepdad, shout out to him, the opportunity to be that for me. But yeah, it was hard to trust. I think it developed an unhealthy level of pride. I say unhealthy level because, you know, first and foremost, like I see why now the Bible warns us by saying pride goes before the fall, because I think what pride can cause you to do is pride can cause you to go deaf. Here's what I mean by that is you stop listening to the unhealthy voices that are probably right there next to you, and you're only listening to your own. So I've actually warn some people like, hey, just be very cautious because your pride can get to a level to where you start to go deaf, and now you're not allowing yourself to pour it into. You're not allowing yourself to be developed. And the only voice that you're in love with that you're going to allow to lead your life is your own voice, but you don't know your own future. So why would you listen to yourself who doesn't know the future? You know, you're setting yourself up for more disappointment.
Good.
Now you're going to be disappointed within yourself about yourself.
That's
so,
really good.
Anyway.
Very true. So we'll move forward a few years to get into like whatever. Eventually, you reconnect with your dad. I know even recently, right? And so your biological father, you have a relationship with him now, currently,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great
And forgiveness and everything's been made whole, and it's
I forgave him years ago.
that's good.
You know, I forgave him years ago, and that's a big testament to it wasn't necessarily me, but it was God's love in me.
Yeah.
That empowered me. That's the beautiful thing about God's love. God's love empowered me to reach that point, to forgive him. You know, and plus when I look at my dad, and this might help somebody out, you know, when I look at my father and some of the mistakes he made, I don't just look at him, because I also understand the household he grew up in.
Yeah.
And then I understand the household that my grandfather grew in. There were some things, some people call it generational curses. I just say generational cultures, not necessarily curses. It could be generational cultures that have been passed down, and it led to some of the choices my dad made, you know? And so anyway, forgiveness. My dad and I, we have a great relationship to this day, and it's so amazing. Like people trip out, you know, or they're kind of shocked, because it's like me and when my dad came out of prison, you know, it's almost like we never.
When did that happen, by the way? When did he get out?
He's been out for 7 years now.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 7 years now. And when we talked, it's like we never skipped a beat, because I am so much like him. And so our humor is the same. We laugh about the same dumb things. Our desires, you know, what we like, what we're into, music, you know. My dad was a dancer. That was one thing that, you know, I'd heard about him, you know, and it's amazing how I got into that even before that. But so my dad and I, we kind of we bonded pretty easy, and I didn't go into it with any bitterness, you know, because I had already forgiven him, and that's because of what God was doing in my life while he was in prison.
For sure. That's beautiful. So, speaking of you as a father now.
Yes.
And you become a father relatively young, so 1920, right? Talk to you about your first child.
I was 21 my first child. Yeah.
Were you ready for it?
No.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really is.
No.
I don't care how many books you read.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
That's true.
For sure not.
I mean, you can you can try your best to equip yourself a little bit, but every child is different.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking.
You need a book per child, then. But then the one that's going to be born
is going to be different.
That book has never been written before.
It's so true.
I think the first kid's an experiment. As I told my kids, I'm like, the first one's an experiment. The second one I've sort of figured out, but the third one I'm perfect. But then I get so, I don't know, because my youngest, probably for most people, the youngest, you're spoiling a little more, so you've let down on all your rules. So all along the way, I think it's important you love the kids, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
So for me, you know, at 21, number one, it was a big shock. It was a huge shock. Again, this is part of when that happened, this was part of my BC life, you know, before Christ. And I was just caught up in some unhealthy things, had unhealthy habits at that time. But I'll never forget being so scared to walk into the room and tell my mom that, you know, the mother of my oldest son, Luke, you know, that she was pregnant. I was like sweating bullets, you know, going in there to tell her. And then of course, you know, there were some challenges with that too. You know, my oldest son's mom, at a certain time in her life also had, some challenges with addiction. I had to, this is why it was that much more difficult for me as a young father at 21, is because of her challenges with addiction. I'll never forget the day that Luke was born. I got a phone call from the hospital. I was there for the birth. It was awesome. You know, I was like crying, shared some tears, but I was a manager at a store, so I had to leave, and there was only 2 managers, so I had to leave. I get a phone call while I'm there, and it's from Luke's mom, and she's just crying. And I hear a lady in the background saying, you know, would you like me to tell him? Would you like me to tell him? And I told her, I said, can you please calm down? Can you tell me what's going on right now? What is happening? In my mind, I'm thinking something's wrong with him. Yeah. Right? I'm thinking the doctors found something, some physical impairment or whatever. And finally, she passes the phone over to the lady. And simply, the lady says, hi, Mr. Sanchez, this is so-and-so from social services. She goes, I'm sorry. She goes, it's unfortunate that I have to let you know this, but we need to let you know this right now. This is part of our protocol. But the mother of your child and your child tested positive for methamphetamine. We have to keep him, run extra test on him. And in that moment, like, that's all I had to hear. I was bawling in my office. I just didn't know what. 21, I mean, again, look at my father figures that were around me weren't always the best, and just, anyway, so I did not know what life had in store for me in the future, and now I'm getting this news, right? And so I say all that to say that I had to take him from the hospital, and he's been with me from day one.
Let me try to step in here too, because Luke's a blessing.
Yes.
And every person needs to understand profoundly in these situations, the kid's not a mistake. The kid's not a problem. The kid's not anything. The kid's a blessing from God.
Yes.
And so, like, looking back over it, and I would say this to any person that's in this situation where, like, something like this happens, that child is an absolute blessing. That child is a gift from God. They're going to make your life so much better, so much richer, so much fuller. Like, you're going to have more joy than you've ever had before because of that child. And so to any person, if you have a child before you planned, or when you're not ready, you don't have enough money, or you're not married, or like you go through all these scenarios and people are like, that child is a blessing. It needs to be emphatic that everybody understands that child is an absolute wonderful blessing from God.
So good.
What maybe didn't enter the world under perfect circumstances, that was everybody else's fault. But that child's a blessing from God. Yeah. And so even your son Luke and any child like that is an absolute complete blessing from heaven.
And to piggyback off of that, because I had to be a father, kind of a mother very quick, he helped me kind of get my act together, so to speak, and so that's how he definitely was a blessing, because it really helped me. Another life helped me reevaluate my life, and so I had to look at, man, now that I became an example. So that's one thing that took place. I didn't just become a father. I think what really helped me make different decisions is like, I'm an example now. Like, this person is going to look up to everything that I do. They're going to see every decision, every habit, and I can't hide it in the house anymore because this child is with me in the home, And so that kind of encouraged me to begin to make wiser choices.
Go through a maturity growth spurt.
Yes. Really quick.
That's good.
Yeah. And I would also say that Luke is a part of the reason too, where I've gave my heart fully over to God.
Yeah.
Because I realized I needed to still be led. I still needed to be fathered.
Now, at this point, do you live on your own, or do you live with your mom, or how's your housing situation with your new baby?
Started off with my mom. I was still living with her, working 2 jobs. I had I had a life, but like I didn't have I didn't have time for hobbies and anything fun or whatever. I would go to work, I would go drop him off at the babysitter, go to work 6 hours. I was working part-time at this one place. I would leave that job, go pick up him, drop him off at home because my mom was there by then, and then I would do a night shift and go back at night to work there, and then come home. I'd be there to feed him. I would eat, and then I remember I would be wiped out, and it'd be 8 p.m. and I'm already asleep because I know he's gonna wake up at midnight for his feeding. So things changed really fast.
That's good.
Can you share? Because you mentioned that's what led you to be closer to the Lord. Can you give your testimony of how you met? Your Creator.
Yeah. So growing up in high school, I had heard about church. Again, I wasn't raised in a Christian home per se, but I've heard about church. I believed in God. My church experience when I was younger was like, I think we went to mass a couple times at a Catholic church, and that's what I knew. But there was, I believed in a God at that time. I can't tell you who really cultivated that within me, but I just remember believing in a God. Anyway, in high school years, I was in and out of church. I only went to church. I started off going to church for a girl.
Of course.
God will use anything.
Doesn't matter the bait on the hook. God doesn't matter the bait. God's drawing you.
God knows, man. He knows what you like. Him and the enemy. Dang.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started off going to this church as an Assemblies of God church in Indio, California, and I went because I was motivated to get closer to this one girl who lived in my apartment complex, and a bus would pick her up every Wednesday for Wednesday night youth. And I asked her, I said, hey, where's this bus taking you? Can me and my friends come? It was like a group of guys in the apartment complex, right? And she said, yeah, and anyway, God used her. But at that time, again, this was before Luke. I just want to let you know, like, that was my faith background.
Yeah.
Was going to church because of a girl, and that was my only motivation to go to church. Fast forward a little bit more, now, Luke's born, all that stuff, and I was at a bad point in my life. I was at a point to where having Luke, I felt like there was just something still missing. I think what happened is I came to the end of myself.
Yeah.
I realized I can't remember. I told you all the pride that was developed from not having my dad. It was a lot of self-dependency. I got to the point to where depending on me is not working anymore. I can't do this by myself anymore. And there has to be something out there that's going to give me what I truly need if I want to keep being a father, if I want to do better in life. And I realized, I came to that revelation that it was only God. At the time, my mom she was going to church heavily. She was the one praying. I was in and out of church, still took care of Luke, but sometimes Luke, as a baby, he would go with his grandparents. And, when he would be gone for the weekend, I'd be gone for the weekend, doing a lot of bad things that people do from sun up to sundown. Mm-hmm. And anyway, since my mom, she was kind of the anchor when it came to my faith. And she would always pray for me. I'd never forget my mom praying for me, come home late at night at times, when I didn't have Luke. And I love telling the story about me coming home one time, like when the sun was coming up, it was like 5 a.m, coming home from partying all night. And I can literally hear my mom praying in the apartment complex in her room. Like she was like when I stress like really praying, she was crying. She was calling out to God. I don't know what posture she was in because she was in the room with the door closed, but I could just hear her crying out to God. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget that moment. That's something that stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And so eventually, I would go to church with her to get her off my back, so she could quit bothering me about me going out. And I remember the pastor, man, at Pentecostal church at this time, so it wasn't the Assemblies of God. And the pastor would, he'd call people out, and Holy Spirit led, I guess. And you young man, you stand up right now, and pointing at me, and I'd stand up, and he would tell me, he goes, I want to let you know, and I'm telling you this because I love you. He goes, I want to let you know that it's always going to be harder to run from God than to run to God. And he wanted me to stop the service to tell you that, and in my mind, I was actually, at that time, I was actually upset at God in that season of my life, because before Luke, I had went to college, but I had to come back. And that's when my life started to spiral downhill. So I didn't want to receive what the man of God was telling me, but in my heart, it's like I knew. So, when God calls you out like that enough, eventually you turn your heart over to him. Sorry, I know that was longer than.
Yeah, so then you gave your life to Jesus.
Yeah. And
then you had two more
amazing blessings. Yeah.
Come on now.
Josiah, who's 7, and Landon, the linebacker, who's 3. I love those guys, man. Josiah, both of them, all my kids, man, they are blessings. Mm-hmm. All of them. They have their moments where they get me upset or whatever, like all parents, but man, they're a blessing. I love them. Josiah, even though he's on the autistic spectrum, he is just, man, the way he impacts my heart and the way I see him impact the hearts of other people, it's just like, this might sound funny to some people, but I know faith, God can heal. I believe that without a shadow of a doubt, and there've been many times where I prayed and he hasn't, but I still believe he's a healer. Mm-hmm. I say that to say, when it comes to my son's condition, my middle son, Josiah, we have prayed over him, declared sound mind, all these times that we prayed over him, and God hasn't healed him yet. But what I've realized is God is using his condition to still impact hearts that lead people to God or lead them close to God. And so I sometimes think about, man, it's not that God doesn't want to heal him. It's God using him to heal other people through his love.
Yeah.
That's good.
Anyway, but yeah, boys are amazing. They keep me on my toes. They keep me praying.
Do you regret any of your kids?
No, not a single one. Mm-hmm. I do not, especially even my first, even though I was at a tough place in my life, Luke, absolutely not. There is no regret. If anything, I am so thankful. For each and every one of them, for how God has used each and every one of my kids to help me be a better father, desire to be a better father, and love them to the point to where they fall in love with Jesus and realize how beautiful it is to allow God to lead your life, and so that they can continue to make a difference however God calls them to.
That's just beautiful.
Any parenting tips? Like, what are your this is how what works for me on raising young men? Yeah.
Well, because my young boys are at 3 different stages, you got 8. Well, now he's 18 and then 7 and 3, as I mentioned. The 18-year-old still one of my biggest challenges. Heck yeah. I love Luke.
Hang on for the ride.
Yeah, I love him. But when it comes to a tip, one thing that I had to grow in, I had to get better at asking questions. If you're a parent parenting a teenager, I would say this more for teenagers. But if you're a parent parenting teenagers, get really good at questions.
Yeah.
I think as a pastor, number one, people are always looking to you for answers, and so sometimes you're quick to come up with that's almost like your natural response. Oh, well, you'll find this in the verse, or this is what God says about that situation, right? So you're almost more quick to give an answer versus ask a question. And so I say that to say, I noticed that my answers when it came to raising my teenage boy, Luke, I was quick to and my answers could have been right, but it was different when I was only giving him answers. I was almost showing him that I'm always right and you're never right. And I realized that, and he expressed that to me one time. He's like, Dad, well, I'm always wrong, I guess. And I was like, wait a minute, who told you that? Because I never told you that. He goes, well, the way you're telling me, it's like everything you say, you're the one who's always right. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I'm like, wow, okay. And of course, just looking at other articles and stuff like that about being a better father, that was one thing that I found consistent in other articles when it comes to fathering teenagers is just questions keep coming up. Get good at asking questions, ask them questions. So I had to shift my fathering approach when it comes to a teenager and just get better at asking questions. How are you doing? And embracing the short answers too. You got to be okay with that. Because I think sometimes parents, they freak out when it's like, how are you doing? I'm fine. And then they can walk away and you're like, but I want to talk to you. You desire to hear more from them, but you got to give them enough grace to eventually be open and vulnerable. And I think the more constant your questions are, the more you encourage vulnerability.
Yeah.
And then there's just that one moment that you have to embrace and they open up.
I think God engages us in the same way, right? Adam and Eve, the first sin. God could have rebuked him for a lot of stupid. He already knew all the answers. Yeah. He never asked the question because he didn't have the answer. But he asked the question for them because he's inviting you into a relationship. Where are you? So when he pursues Adam and Eve, it's a question of love. And so engaging people with questions, and especially when those are like running from God or doing things that are wrong, I think an insightful question is most important.
Yeah, and that goes for any relationship, because that approach, when I'm approaching somebody with questions, especially if it's somebody new that I'm meeting for the first time, by me approaching them with questions, I'm showing that person that I want to know about you, not tell you what I know. And I think sometimes, if you're just somebody who's always just trying to reveal what you know, that can actually push people away. And that means your own kids. Yeah. And I had to learn that, I thought, but this is the right answer. This is what the Bible says, you know what I mean? Or what I'm saying is good insights, so that you avoid some of the, things that I had to stumble into. But again, the approach is what I had to adjust. And I've learned that I've made more of an impact by just constantly just asking my son questions, and just keep asking until I have that one moment where he's super vulnerable. And then we have just that good father and son, talk. I mean, you guys know. Yeah. Or,
Well, yeah. I don't know, but this is what I read in the book. I read that boys, they before they talk, they have to go through an adventure and then they open up. With women, you have to pursue their heart and then they open up. Yeah. Well, I know for sure the women thing does work because I do it on my girls all the time. Like this morning, Ruby was there. I was the first one to wake up. I go to Ruby's room and I just laid down. I don't ask her questions, but I really want to know because I haven't really spent time with her lately, right? And I say, "Damn, babe, you're so beautiful. Dang, I mean, you must be getting guys like hitting you up all the time. Like you're gorgeous." Anyways, and then I start like acariciándola. What do you say that? Like just caressing her, right? Yeah. Caressing her. And don't even ask her a question. And then all of a sudden she's opening up and she just starts talking and telling me everything about what's going on. And I'm like, perfect. This is what I wanted.
Yeah. That's good. And one thing too, I just want to make sure I mentioned, is ask questions in a way that doesn't seem like you're interrogating them, but that you just simply want to know. In other words, don't ask 100 questions. Yeah. If you're going to ask your teenager questions, don't do 1,000,000 questions because you become an interrogator, not a father or a parent in that moment, and that's another thing I had to learn is not come to him with, even though I had 1,000,000 questions in my pocket because I wanted to know the answer or what was going on with him, I had to be very strategic and say, okay, I'm going to ask maybe 3, see if he wants to open up. And if not, then be okay with that and revisit it again. Yeah. Ask him again. And eventually you get that moment. So.
Well said.
Well, Pastor Andrew, this was an amazing podcast.
For sure.
A lot of great gold bars, gold nuggets, and we really appreciate your time. Any last words, Pastor?
No, I think it was fantastic.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. I just want to say, I appreciate you guys just having me on, and allowing just to share my story, and hopefully it impacts somebody, reach somebody. But really, thank you for your guys' leadership. One thing I do want to definitely mention is that a part of the reason, I know I say this, but I'll never get tired of saying it, a part of why I am the man I am today is because I'm surrounded by other really awesome men. As iron sharpens iron, so we sharpen one another. And truly, without you guys having to teach me, what you guys have done, or I've seen you guys respond, whether it's you interacting with your daughters or you interacting with your sons, believe me, I picked up on some things. So thank you guys, for having me and for what you guys do.
Let's go.
Fathers.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thanks, be true.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're amazing.
Thank you.